afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I think most of everybody that's in the audio is now working. I'm Michelle Franchini, the editor of Australian Catholics, and this afternoon, Jesuit Communications Head of Publishing, Michael McVeigh, will discuss retreats in schools with Francis Tilley of Jesuit and Ignation Spirituality Australia, and Michael Todd, a teacher and director of Ignation Ethos and Identity at Geelong's St Ignatius College. As you will have been aware, we are recording this, and the recording will be available next week after we've had a chance to do it. But first, I'd like to make the acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various places from which we gather together today, who have walked upon and cared for this land for thousands of years. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We also pay our respects to First Nations people attending today's session. We acknowledge the continued deep spiritual attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to this country, and commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of reconciliation. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And if we could start with a welcoming prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this conversation. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we explore how we might become better educators and stewards of our young people, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of humanity. We ask these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, before I hand over to Michael to introduce our guests, Francis and Michael, just some housekeeping. As I've said, the videos, this is being recorded, and the video will be available on the Australian Catholics Education Hub site in coming days, probably mid to late next week. For those of you who have registered for professional development attendance for accreditation, will be taken. To make it easier for us, can you please make sure that your full name is on the Zoom, first and last names? Thank you. If you haven't provided us with your VIT number, you can message myself or Laura Kings in the chat with your name and VIT number, and we'll put our names in the chat shortly. If you don't have your VIT number ready, that's fine. You can again email myself or Laura Kings. As the discussion goes on, please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat, and if we get a chance, we'll answer them. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this session as much as everybody. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Michelle. My pleasure to be the host of this session and to facilitate the conversation today. My retreat running experience is probably a couple of decades old now, but I'm very pleased to be joined today by two people with much more recent experience. I think this is an area of passion for me as well. I think doing proper formation and giving people those chances to take space away and to really kind of connect both with God and each other is actually really important in the life of a community. So I think I'm hoping we get a lot out of the conversation today. I'll introduce, just to introduce our two guests. Francis Tilley works in leadership with Jesuit and Ignation Spirituality Australia, and is based in Sydney. She's a formator and practitioner and gives the spiritual exercises, spiritual direction, and professional supervision, and also develops and facilitates practical spiritual formation programs for leadership, staff, and volunteers in diverse contexts, including, of course, schools. Francis is one of those people that's very passionate and very much imbibed in Ignatian spirituality, and we'll explore exactly what that's all about a little bit later. But I'm really excited to have Francis here because I think she's got some amazing insights, and she's got a great presence and ability to kind of engage in some of this stuff. So really pleased to have you with us, Frances.
Thank you.
Also joined today by Michael Todd. Michael's been teaching in schools for over 20 years in diverse charisms. He's currently he's the director of Ignation, Ethos and Identity at St Ignatius College, Geelong, where he's engaging with students and teachers in various retreat and formation experiences. But in addition to that, he has worked in a range of different schools and contexts over his 20 years of teaching, and I'm excited and interested to hear more about that during this session as well, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Maybe I've given a little brief introduction to each of you, but maybe to start off and start with you, Frances, but maybe just tell us a little bit of your background in running retreats, and then share what is it that draws you. I've spoken a little bit of why I like retreats, and I think it's an important space, but what is it that draws you to retreat ministry?
Thanks, Michael, and hello, everyone. I realized, I went on retreats when I was at school a long time ago, and I really had a first taste of retreat experience when I left university and thought I was going to be a chartered accountant in London, which really wasn't me at all, and then decided to train as a teacher of languages, European languages. So I had a summer interlude, and I went to a retreat centre in the country in the UK, which was very beautiful. And I just did housekeeping and ordinary stuff, but participated in things and came alongside. So I think that was a little bit prescient, really, kind of sowing a seed. It was just practical, but it was an opportunity to kind of have space. And I think that's something I really love about the retreat experience. It opens a space and holds a space, even a little one of a short time or longer. So I always really loved that, and the opportunity, and I still do, to connect with oneself, others, and God in a different way, in a kind of slow way that's very holistic. So one thing's kind of led to another, and in recent years, I suppose I work on retreats, facilitating and working with others to offer them in all sorts of contexts, out and about. Most recently with prison chaplains up the coast in a kind of grungy little house by the water. It was really good. They are wonderful. And then, with teachers, often the staff spirituality days are right on the last day of term, in my experience. So, everyone really wants to just end the term and go on holiday, but nonetheless, opportunities like that to kind of open that space and with enjoyment, enable people to have different kinds of conversation and reflection. So out and about, and also at Canisius where I work, when people come on silent retreats, tasting them for the first time over a weekend, or 8 days longer versions, and even 30-day spiritual exercises. So I'm very grateful to have had many opportunities to kind of be involved with retreats and go on them myself.
Thanks, Frances. Michael, can you talk a little bit about your background doing retreats, and what is it that draws you to this ministry area in the church?
Thanks, Michael. And it's a real privilege to be here, sitting on the same panel as Frances, because when I met Frances, I was struck, as I'm sure a lot of us are, by just how grounded she is in Ignatian spirituality. And I guess that's the first point I would make. My experience, I was lucky enough to be invited to a retreat just out of primary school. So I was in secondary school, and a retreat was advertised in our local parish, and it was part of like the Antioch movement, if people remember that. And the most striking thing about that retreat that I remember still to this day is being welcomed, because I hadn't seen some of my school friends who I hadn't seen for a few years were going to be there. But I was welcomed by one of the retreat leaders, who was the big sister of one of my friends in primary school. And I still remember to this day just how powerful it was to be met with someone that I didn't really know too well, but with such a big smile and such a warmth. And I thought, oh, this is different, this way of relating to people. And And the retreat went on to be a wonderful experience for me. So that was a really good start. Then when I was at school, yes, there were year-level retreats that we would go on. But I think, again, the standout for me was in my senior year. If anyone remembers stranger camps, we called them stranger camps back at the Christian Brothers. And I went to a single-sex school, and we were going off to be with, I think, the girls from Sacre-Cœur, and so that was very exciting. But again, there were a couple of moments that really stood out for me, where I understood that this way of being with people there was something very almost scandalous about how honest we could be with each other. So that's something that I guess has left its mark on me. And then I guess in Catholic schools, we try to do the same. We'll take year levels away and offer that kind of retreat. It's a different model from where you're actually inviting people who come voluntarily, who are seeking something. So the year level retreats require a different kind of logistics, a different kind of rhythm, structure. But yeah, retreat ministry has really become a focus for me. We are at our school, we're a Jesuit companion school, so we're looking to emulate some of the things that our sort of in the bigger Jesuit family, some of the schools have ongoing, there's quite a strong tradition of retreats, and we're looking at what is going on and how we might be able to reproduce something of that here within our context, which is, as I think I said in my write-up, that's the exciting and creative work, how to make retreats engaging, how to make them spiritual experiences for the children that are coming through our schools today.
Thanks, Michael. Well, there's a point of connection. Stranger camps were also important for my journey in both first as a student and then as a leader in post schools. So one of the how we framed this is sort of tips for running a successful retreat, and we did a similar one last year along this topic, and Slingo, who's in the audience, was one of our guests for that one. But one of the things that, one of the kind of points of conversation, what is a successful retreat, but how do we define success in a retreat setting? And is, maybe it's a better word is sort of how do we kind of facilitate an authentic retreat experience for the participants? So what's your thinking around that kind of question about what makes, what for you is, how would you kind of determine when you walk out of a retreat and go, that was a really successful retreat? Michael, do you want to start? Sorry.
Oh, no. Are you? Okay. Well, for me, I like how you took time there, Michael, to try and work. Well, what's the best way of expressing this? How do we determine the success of a retreat? And I realize why that word's not necessarily the best fit. It's something quite intangible, but again, I think it goes back to what I was saying there about there's something in the way of being with people that a retreat, and Francis used the beautiful language of opening a space and holding a space. I know that a retreat has been successful if I can tell that the students have discovered a way of being with each other that's new. There's something new that's happened here. And young people are amazingly sensitive to those sort of social cues that, there are the everyday typical ways of relating to each other. But I think that there's a look that comes into their face. There's an atmosphere created in a room. There's certainly an energy created in a small group, and you can feel it. I'm not always saying it's something that you can necessarily, write down exactly what the conditions are that have created this, but you can certainly sense when young people are discovering a new way of being, both young, but also people of faith, they're discovering ways, and often it's realizing, oh, I don't have to necessarily use all the religious language. I can speak honestly, and in that way I can get in touch with how God might be at work in my life. But it comes through first and foremost, I believe, in that way of relating to each other, and you can see it and you can sense it. So that's what I would say is a successful retreat.
Thanks, Michael. Francis, what are your thoughts around that?
So the retreat work I do would be with adults, so teachers rather than students, in an education context generally. For me, I'd say it's something about people coming home to themselves, some peace or ease, feeling a shift into kind of relaxing with curiosity. Having said that, I also think sometimes a disturbance, not a traumatizing one, but some sort of something stirred up is also a sign of a good retreat, because certainly from an Ignatian perspective, Ignatius Loyola is looking for movement, rather than a placidity that's like, oh, it doesn't matter. So I think various things, some movement can be really good, a little bit of something stirred, but also that peace, feeling a greater ease in who I am and regard for my life and our life as the group, that sort of increase of hope and connection. I think those can be signs of a good retreat experience, and perhaps even joy, that it's been a good experience, or deep connection through maybe facing some sorrow or difficulty that's among us, being able to name, as Michael was saying, going a little deeper together, in an openness to share and listen.
You mentioned a couple of things there, and it's particularly to do with Ignatian spirituality and Ignatian processes. Francis, can you maybe just talk a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about Ignatian spirituality, and how that's sort of how that sort of works in a retreat context?
Yes. Well, firstly, I'd want to say, Ignatian spirituality didn't drop from the sky. It's in our tradition and emerging through the life of this man, Ignatius Loyola, and then his friends and associates. So, but he was formed himself in other charisms, Benedictine, and he was interested in Dominic, so of the day. So it's a kind of evolving, it's a charism that evolved, and in some ways, it resonates with other good spiritualities in our Catholic way. But what makes this spirituality, and there'd be others here who could contribute to this conversation, I think there's a real value on personal experience. Ignatius and his friends, they really listened deeply and valued their own particular individual and then communal experience together. So the Ignatian way really looks to say, what's happening in your life, and valuing that. And that is a very sacred thing, and to be nourished and developed and listened to. The Ignatian way is also about being in the thick of it all. It's not, I know we're talking about retreats, but it's not retreating to beautiful places and living there like in a monastic kind of way. It's bring it on in the cities and towns, metropolitan areas. Like these places are where we live, and God is very active. So the Ignatian way is about looking and expecting to find God right here, wherever we are. Also, I guess it's asking about what each one of us and together we deeply desire and hope for. So it's about a God who dreams and has great big desires, and to kind of really listen to those and discern the lead of those. So that can be quite exciting and hope-filled for us today, and for young people, that you do dare to dream, as Pope Francis asks us. The Ignatian way nurtures that very strongly. It's about looking for the way in there's a lot of language in Ignatian spirituality, which isn't always helpful. So here's a little phrase, the way of consolation. So it's really looking for, where is the joy and the peace and the good energy in my life, or in our staff, or the science faculty, or whatever. You know, it's looking and really claiming that, to go that way, and to know the other way that pulls us away from that joy or sense of rightness and life, you know. So the Ignatian way is a kind of discerning. It's always looking to choose, to notice, and then claim it and choose it, or ask to go further together that way. So just a couple more things. The different ways to pray. So one of them that you possibly are aware of is the prayer with imagination. Again, Ignatius didn't invent it, but it kind of was very helpful for him, so he developed it. So how we use our imagination is, you know, it's a holistic way. So imagination is very much part of how we operate, isn't it? As human beings, as well, teachers, parents, friends, we're, you know, imagining our lives and what we hope to do with them, and imagining, you know, wanting our students to imagine how they're going to contribute and step into their lives. So this way of praying with imagination is a powerful dimension, the Ignatian way, going into a scene in the Gospels, for example, and being one of the characters, and seeing what happens. It's a powerful means of encountering Jesus and myself, that relationship. There are more things to say, but it's probably good for you to be going on with.
Thanks, Frances. Michael, in your role, you're being in a school with an Ignatian charism, and your role is to try and apply that charism and bring that into the formation that you're doing with students and teachers in the school. So what does that look like? What are the sort of experiences then that you would be inviting teachers and students into in that school, that sort of, you know, that would evoke some of that stuff that Frances was talking about there?
First and foremost, when I came into this role, I immediately had Frances Tilley come down to our school and take us through some formation for, you know, what we call our ethos and identity team. And it was so important, I think, to be, you know, we were a team of about 15 people, and we're not meeting all that regularly, but it was just so important that we got to hear, I mean, you can hear Frances use Ignatian spirituality or the idea of it very much as not an intellectual, I mean, while there are, you know, there's lots of language around it and there are ideas, but it's accessible. And I guess this is also part of the reason that we're perhaps, you know, we're all hearing about Ignatian spirituality, or it's certainly enjoying a high sort of profile at the moment for people. There seems to be lots of ways in. So I'm going to take the point that Frances made about lived experience. To me, what I've done with the staff over the last few years is move away from a stand-up presenter who's going to offer 40 minutes of input about, you know, some kind of theme, whatever that might be. Now, that certainly works, and we've all sat and listened to guest speakers and enjoyed their witty, you know, way of communicating their ideas, and their learned, you know, their wisdom. But I guess taking what Frances was saying about, you know, it's our lived experience, that's really where we might see how God is at work in our lives. And that was the invitation that I took up. So we brought in what we call Ignatian conversations, to a spiritual conversation, but it's very simple to do in that you take a group of staff, sort of, you know, it could be 5, could be 8 people, you sit them in a circle, you take turns as you go around the circle, and you're not allowed to be interrupted, and there is a very strict time limit, so you can't just waffle on, but you talk about you know, whatever is emerging from a prompt that you've been given. And we found, as a school community, this was a wonderful way to spend, you know, we've got Ignatian formation days, to spend, a couple of hours listening, because an Ignatian conversation is a lot about listening, because you are sitting and being attentive as each person takes their turn, and you're not interrupting them, and you're certainly not being able to offer the, oh yeah, no, I've got a similar experience, and interjection, the way we would do in normal conversation in our day-to-day lives. We would listen to each other. We would often be overwhelmed by our own sort of empathy and compassion, because people would be revealing things that perhaps they'd been struggling with, as teachers. And we'd be thinking, oh, I'm exactly the same. But we'd also get the opportunity to speak uninterrupted for 2 or 3 minutes and listen to how, my own experience is something that I'm able to contribute here and to share, and to become a little more aware that what's going on in my life is the grist for, these formative experiences. It's not detached from that. It's not, okay, now I've got to go and, do this sort of religious thing over in the corner, and then I'll get back to my daily life. It's actually, an Ignatian conversation brings you face to face with your lived experience as the religious experience. So anyway, that's one example, a very clear difference that we've introduced as a way of forming staff is using Ignatian conversation.
We've done some Ignatian conversations as a staff in our office as well. I've been involved in Christian Life Communities, which is sort of built around a similar process. But it's quite interesting to me also, things like the Plenary Council in Australia were using that format of conversation where everyone comes together and has those opportunities to share. Even what I've heard of the Synod on Synodality over in Rome is sort of, trying to kind of bring this culture of spiritual conversation into the church. Francis, one of the things that I think, a lot of people feel a little bit intimidated at, but just, having people to lead this conversation process, like what kind of training, what kind of formation, how hard is it to lead this process? What sort of training formation you need to be able to lead people on these kind of in this sort of process?
For spiritual conversation,
yeah,
it's not hard at all. We have a very simple process that we share, and we intend for them to ripple out, for the receivers to become givers, if you like. So it's very simple. Some guidelines around what to say, the timing is practical, and then what we mean by listening and conversation, and the discernment in the 3 rounds. That typically has 3 rounds of listening, and then what have we heard, and then what's emerging for us. So so to sort of unpack a little bit what the kind of listening involves, drawing sometimes on Ignatius letters and other good contemporary wisdom around listening and speaking. So learning about focus and not necessarily listening to understand, but respect. So it's very, very doable. I think you might agree. And Anne, who's sitting there, I know Anne Slingo has used spiritual conversation in the classroom with parent interviews with students who are kind of struggling. It's very adaptable as well. So it's not rocket science. So it's natural to us, isn't it, to have good conversations? And this is just shaping them. So very, very doable. But good to experience a little bit of training to practice. Yeah.
Michael, what do you do to kind of prepare and support teachers in doing those?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And in some ways, I mean, we've got 140 staff. And so if you're breaking those, that big body of staff into groups of 8, you realize that, you've got quite a few leaders that kind of need to then be able to go and to hold that space, as Francis said before. So what we did, we actually had, I don't know, some of you might have encountered Helena Goldsmith, who working with Max here in Victoria, and she came to offer her own framework that she uses to introduce spiritual conversations to staff. And for us, I guess we tried to allow for the fact that we weren't going to necessarily have the 3 rounds that would arrive at, what do we hear the group, discerning, to use that Ignatian word. Father John Dardis, who, led the Jesuit retreat last year, he's got some videos online that are freely available where he talks beautifully about what spiritual conversation is and how it can work, at the upper echelons, or, school boards, or, making important decisions. But what we were doing was pulling it all the way down, and just as teachers, and using prompts like, what was the most exciting thing to happen this term, in the classroom or just at school, or, what were some challenges that you've overcome? And so allowing the conversation format just to provide time for teachers to listen to themselves, and to listen to each other. But I realize that hopefully, as Francis says, emerges into a deeper and more, holistic, experience of Ignatian conversation, that actually you can arrive at something and feel, well, the decision that we're making here today, based on the conversations we've been having, are actually coming from, or, are grounded in a way that perhaps is far more convincing and permanent than perhaps a decision that you've come up with because of you've been arguing with people, you've been, fielding questions left, right, and centre, and, that form of debate and discussion, and you arrive at a decision, is in complete contrast to some kind of decision you make that's arrived at after 3 rounds of conversation.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of the practicalities of running retreats with students, and maybe just share some of your experience and insights around that. I mean, there's, if you've got a big student cohort of 200, 250 in a year level, and you want to, run a retreat experience, how would you, what are some of the tips you have around doing that? Like, what kind of space do you need to run the retreat? Is it better to do a big group or break it into separate, smaller groups? What's some of the tips you have for kind of, when for trying to kind of organize retreat experiences for cohorts of students?
Is this me again?
Yes.
So yeah, I've seen year level retreats work most successfully where, we do have year levels of 250 students, but we would break them in half, and we would take half for the day. So that's 120 students. And then from there, 4 separate activities on a bit of a rotation. So you are trying to end up at 30 students, rather than a whole cohort of 125. I mean, that's at the beginning and at the end of the day, and finished with a mass, and that's okay because there are structures there that students recognize. But within those 4 rotations, you can hopefully achieve a more retreat-like experience. And, with students, this particular example, the Year 8 retreat that's been running at this school for many years, they were moving in one of those workshops. So it was a physical way of being in the room with each other. One was art. So it's also offering that diverse, varied program that gives students sort of a distinct experience in each rotation. So that's one way. That's the year level, but I do think breaking them up obviously helps. And then, of course, you've got the different, tips and tricks. Taking students into an environment that they're unfamiliar with, that always works. I think we spoke before about, or Francis mentioned, being in, just often the natural environment is a wonderful way to allow students to just become a little freer. So walking along the beach, I mean, we're lucky here in the Bellarine, it's not too far from some kind of coastal experience that I've seen work particularly well. I mean, just having students take a walk on a beach, holding some intention or being quite intentional about at a starting point and then what happens at the end of our walk. I mean, that's a simple enough experience for them, but the waves and the sand and the all of that works. It's magic. So rather than treat it like a classroom and sit them down and then instruct them, I mean, that would be my clear tip. And I don't think I'm telling anyone anything new here, but steering away from that kind of experience, obviously.
I mean, where some schools may be limited in where they can do it and may need to do it at school. Any tips for kind of trying to create that level of experience within a school environment?
Yeah, well, again, and I'm certainly not really an expert in this. I'm just sort of in the thick of it as we play with different ways of engaging our students. But it's amazing what a candle will do in a darkened room. So even though it's a classroom and you push all the desks to the outside, and sit the students around and have this, and there's always a couple of students in there that are amazing at preparing a space and saying, well, what's our centerpiece? What's our focus? And then allowing them to sort of play with that. And then we had just the other day, a little liturgy where, and look, this is the ideal scenario, but there's a guitar and there's a student that can play and sing. And so a song. But with the lights off and with the candles going, I mean, it's the classic, sort of Catholic liturgy, isn't it? But it transforms the space, and it doesn't matter that it's a classroom. Once that door is closed, and if you can draw some blinds to create a dim ambiance, but with the candlelight and with music, it's amazing how that works.
Thanks, Michael. Francis, anything to add there in terms of working with different spaces and trying to kind of create an environment for people to engage?
Yes, I definitely agree with trying to get outside if you can. I'd say I work with teachers mainly, but to be outside, even to look outside through a big window, just to bring the body, move the body, I think is really important. And have a walk or, breathe together, just to really come into the body is really important. A walk in pairs, so mixing up the day. It's different with I don't know, I would have managed to bring staff into a darkened room with a candle and a guitar. I think often they feel that teachers are quite reticent and not comfortable to share so naturally their faith life, or not initially anyway. So just very respectful of that slow kind of way in, perhaps, but to connect with nature is really significant, I think. And I mean, we use exercises, and there's a wonderful series which has just been published, God's Field Hospital Exercises, and by Michael Hansen, Australian Jesuit. And they all invite a symbol, sometimes a given symbol, or bring a symbol and share a small story. And they're very strong, they're very doable and very strong ways of people touching into their experience and sharing it with enjoyment, with laughter, and but some sort of simple method like that, and some journaling. I think this is not really answering about space, but it's things that can work very well with adult retreats, staff retreat.
You mentioned there people coming in with different sort of I guess levels of formation or preparation for what a retreat experience might entail. I'm sure students as well, you'll have different, some people who are kind of willing to engage, if perhaps reluctantly, to others who are really not wanting to engage at all. How do you go about, what sort of strategies do you have to sort of just, help engage people who have, who have different levels of buy-in, I guess, in terms of the experience.
That's for me.
Look, jump in.
Go for it, Michael.
It's a great question. We take away our year 11s on a retreat down to Anglecrest. And last year we had a contingent of young men who we could tell were not really ready to be sharing on the level that some of the other students were definitely ready. And I like this question because that impacts the dynamic of a group. So it's interesting. When they were in a bigger group, that was noticeable because they gravitate to each other. In a retreat setting, you don't have a seating plan. These are the tactics that a teacher might use. Well, I can put you here, here, and here, and differentiate the activity, and that's going to be harder in a retreat setting. I guess what we found was that allowing those students to realize that this was an opportunity for people to trust. This was an opportunity to share on a deeper level, and that takes a degree of vulnerability. And when you speak like that to young people, even if they're not ready to engage on that level, often that reaches them, and they can sit back then and that they'll respect the process. They mightn't themselves be able to offer at any particular level. So that was successful. Just talking about vulnerability, talking about deepening levels of trust, because I think all young people hear those words and it resonates somewhere deep inside them. And the only other thing I would say was that being very intentional about the small groups. So keeping students that you might feel aren't ready, making sure that there's not some critical mass of them in any small group. So actually, and you'll find, or we have found, that on their own, suddenly they are free to perhaps join what they're seeing happen around them, now that they don't have their peers there that might have been otherwise difficult to enter into that level of retreat.
Thanks, Michael. Francis, in your experience more with adults, but you would have people coming in with different levels of, I guess, Catholicism or exposure to this stuff. How do you how do you work with that?
Well, I would work with the inviting REC or whoever it is in the school to kind of talk around understand the context more and get a sense of what's been happening, what's important to be aware of, and that person might help with the small groups as well, as you've been talking about, Michael, with students. So if we have small group conversation, might have a view on the composition of those groups. And also I would just say, I'm offering something today that we have found life-giving and help, and it's up to you, how you can receive it as you can, and just enter into this as you can. So just to be very invitational, and also invite people to kind of receive this gift, really, and just as they can, and to give respect to the group, I suppose. So it's just set some kind of ground rules in a sense around that, but it is an offering, and at the end of the day I can only offer it, and it's with each one to receive it or not. I think that's
we had a question in the chat about engaging at different sort of age levels as well, and I just want to get that before we sort of get to the end, and particularly as I think the question in the chat was around primary school students. Michael, if you had any experience in sort of doing retreats and things for primary school students, or what sort of approaches would you use for kind of engaging at that level in terms of retreats or formation in schools?
Look, I don't have a lot of experience at primary school. I have seen some beautiful, lavish use of symbols And I know young people particularly enjoy that. So it might be a fountain, it might be an amazing flame that's flickering. You know, I guess that itself, or also creative expression. I mean, yeah. So allowing young people to create something, and that's what we struggle with adolescents. They tend to shut down and they think, oh no, the creative kids are in the art room. We're not creative anymore. So it's hard to break them into, or break new ground with them doing simple things like collages or, you know, mandala work or whatever it might be, found objects in nature, you know, a leaf, a stone, a stick, a shell. But young people are still, you know, I mean, I'm generalizing here, but I think that works particularly well, getting them to create something, whether it's, you know, something tangible or even poetry or dance. I've seen that work particularly well in the more primary levels. But just going back on my primary experience, no, I wasn't long out of primary school, but I guess I was in secondary school, but really relishing the opportunity to be with my peers at a younger age, and to feel that whatever was being offered, the presenters, it was definitely opening our eyes to again a new kind of experience. And I think that young people are always looking at that. What's the next? What's this? Are we graduating, you know, in life, some kind of experience? And I can still remember that excitement, that I thought, oh, I'm growing up, you know. And this was an experience as a young person about that. So not what's that word, you know, condescending or patronizing them, but allowing them to feel that what we're trying to do on this retreat is opening up perhaps into a deeper, truer sense of who you really are.
Thanks, Michael. And Laura Kings, who's in the back of this one, had a really great activity on one of our classroom activities that I was looking at recently, because we developed a retreat resource for around Laudato Si, and she's a really great walking in nature activity for primary school level students. And I was thinking that would be another really good way to engage. I mean, we spoke earlier about that engagement with nature and just being out in that natural space. And you said, you mentioned picking up objects, you know, something where they're sort of engaging in that nature. Laura there's a challenge for you, Laura. You can put a link to it in the chat.
Oh yeah, that one's that's one of my older ones, but I've got a heap in my head. I'm thinking Post-it notes on a tree, making a chain of doves, flames. There's all sorts of things you can do with primary school kids.
So yeah, some really good. So I think there's some really potentially rich activities there as well. So thank you. Frances, did you have anything else to bring on that? Given you're mostly working with adults, so it's a fairly big gap from where you normally
Well, yeah, yes and no. You know, when you go around, I mean, an art gallery, say an exhibition, and they often have a version for children, and I don't know if you ever look at those, you know, that they're actually very appealing. So I do think there would be adaptability, as crazy as it might sound, to kind of keep it simple, because that's what I feel for working with teachers, is like just one or two really beautiful things, and inviting that creativity and responding and receiving. I think that's what can happen when you go out in nature, or with, you're receiving something. It's not work to be done, but you're being nourished without having to do anything really. So I feel there is a correspondence between what primary students might do and actually, would there be something there for adults?
Before we sort of Laura's got a small presentation, but before we get to that, I just want to give each of you a chance. What's one thing that you run on a retreat that you think that works really well for you, or that's worked really well for you, that you really enjoy sort of offering to people? Can you maybe each of you share one thing that you like doing?
You want to start, Frances?
Well, I have kind of shared a few. I guess I do love assuming that the context is the people are open, but to bring them into an encounter with Jesus in a gospel event, praying with imagination, sort of leading into that, guiding or opening that up for people. I'd love to do that. And yeah.
Thank you. That's great. And Michael?
I'm going to go with singing. Now, again, it can depend on the group that you've got, the cohort that you've got. I'm going to talk personally. Porta Fide in Lismore Diocese was a retreat that was for staff. And we went away for 3 days, and a musician was there now, and it was deliberate, and he taught us the songs that we would be singing in our final mass. For me, you can't get better than that. That learning the song as part of the retreat experience, and then standing there and then as a group singing those songs, to me, I don't know, I find that powerful, very powerful. And so what we try to do with our young people, we've often got a couple of people who are willing to offer their own singing, but I guess I'm talking about getting the young people to sing as well. And I've seen it happen a couple of times. You play the right kind of song. It does take a little bit of curation of the music. But even if it's a song that's just leading them into, look, as a group, we can be together. I mean, singing together. Well, I mean, we know that's an amazing experience for young people, and they don't often get to do it in that spiritual context. I mean, they might be doing it in concerts and you know, going out, but doing it in a spiritual context, it's still very precious. So I'm not pretending that I have got this polished version of that, but I have seen music work wonders, and so I would say that's my kind of go-to thing to offer people on retreat.
Thanks, Michael. I might hand over to Laura in just a moment, but before I do, Frances may have to leave us a little bit early because she has another thing on at 5:30. So thank you. If you do have to leave us before we finish up, Frances, thank you very much for everything you brought to this session.
Thank you.
Laura?
Thanks so much, Frances. No, it was a fascinating conversation, and brought back so many good memories in the classroom. I was remembering one day when there was some naughty gentlemen at a school, not a Catholic school, I was on retreat with, and I took them into a room and we did yoga together. And I was just thinking, it's funny, if you've got a novel thing that you're good at, it always comes out on retreat when you need it. And they loved it. And they were really interesting young men. So don't forget your novel. I know, talent. So what I'd like to do now is just share my screen. I'm just going to put here we go. I'm going to send everybody this document. I hope you can see it. I've written a little guide because we're all busy, and sometimes we need, you know, two of us. And so that's where I've been exploring using ChatGPT, but in a responsible way. And so sometimes if you're trying to come up with some reflection questions, or you've gone, like the retreat's taken a different direction than you planned, and you want to write some reflection questions quickly, provided you're in a place where you've got cell phone availability, I just put together this little guide. So obviously reflection matters for a number of reasons: spiritual growth, personal connections, self-awareness, community building, metacognition, which I've highlighted a bit below, life skills, and inspiring action. So they were talking at a conference I was at last week about helping people to process their experiences of formation activities, and I took that to heart, and I spent some time with my notes last week, and I think it was a very useful activity. But sometimes when you're working with younger people or even busy people, you need to give them a framework in which to do that. So some ideas about crafting some reflection questions. Well, they could be on an exit ticket. There could be a different question for each group member on a post-it note. You can ask them verbally. You don't have to make a big deal about it, just to help people process their experience. But what you do want to have is clarity and focus. You want them open-ended. You want people to experience connection. You want to engage critical thinking, emotional engagement. You want to think about spiritual and ethical dimensions, and you might want them to be action oriented. And because I'm primarily a classroom teacher, I'm going to say, let's make them metacognitive and let's give them some self-assessment so that they're learning about their learning as they go through. But don't make a big deal about it. We don't have to make a big deal. What I think it's really good to talk about, and I won't go through it too much today, is the fact that using AI has pitfalls and you have to use it very carefully. But I think sometimes engaging with it ourselves helps us to work with it with our students. We certainly have started to see some of the entries in the YVA coming in with a little bit of AI influence and that sort of thing. And so it's good to understand how it works and have a go. So this is one way you can. But if you use it responsibly, you might be able to enhance your reflection activity. You may not. So I just wanted to remind everyone that we have some Australian Catholics retreat guides. So I've put the link in there if you want to go and have a look. If you're feeling a bit like you need inspiration, Mick's actually written some beautiful guides, and he's added 2 more this year, and he adds to them regularly. Here, just to show you, I took one of our older retreat guides and actually put it into ChatGPT and generated some reflection questions. When I do it, I don't want ChatGPT to generate creative writing or imagination. So I take part of our article and I put it directly. You could take your script or your planning for the day and I copy and paste it directly into ChatGPT so that it knows what it has to respond to. It will still make stuff up. And certainly if it suggests resources, you go and check those resources out. 100% of my experience so far has been that if it suggests a book or something, it doesn't exist. So you have to be really, really careful. And this is what I got. So it provided me with these questions. I think they're okay for high school. You might want to specify if you've got younger students or just have 3 questions or 2 questions. Even with high school students, I think 8's too many. But it gives you a list to choose from too if you're going to reuse those resources year on year. But I felt it hadn't done a good enough job. So you've always got to be the editor in this, having a look at it. So I said, I want to know more about, self-assessment and metacognition. And so I got it to, and it came up with some very good questions. So we'll send that guide to you so you can have a look for yourself. It might be for you, it might not be for you, but if you're really struggling and you want to sort of get that work done, this may support you. The thing I would say is it's not for first year teachers to use ChatGPT straight away. I think it's better to think about it so that you've got the skills to reflect upon and edit your work. You have to experience it first before you use an aid. But anyway, there's something to think about. If the students want to use it, we can use it too. And we'll send that guide out to you in the email shortly. So did anyone have any questions or comments?
Thanks for that, Laura. We might invite Michelle in now just to do a final thing, but just a quick note. I noticed some people pointing about wondering where certificates or tap things. So our process is within about a week or so, hopefully after the session, we upload the attendance. If you're in the Victorian Diocese, we'll upload the attendance to the TAP platform. So it should automatically kind of be processed through that. If you're not in Victorian Dioceses, we will send out a certificate. Now we upload all of the emails of all the people who we mark off as attended to our email platform and then send out an email certificate to people. Now sometimes, so if you haven't received one, for example, someone here said they hadn't received one in the music mission session we did a couple of weeks ago. If you haven't received it, please get in touch with us. It may have been that it went to spam or something like that, but that's our process for sending it out. So if you haven't received one for the last one on Music Mission, get in touch with us, because that did go out about a week ago. And hopefully within about a week you'll get one for this session as well. So that's just our process. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to you, Michelle. Oh, sorry, before I finish, I should also thank Michael. Francis had to just jump off there, but I should thank Michael again for his contribution today. Thanks. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Michael, and it's been a pleasure having you in this session. Hopefully, I've certainly got a lot out of listening to you, and I hope everyone else has too.
Thanks very much, Michael, Michelle and Laura. Lovely to be here. And Michael, we'll have to swap notes on stranger camps.
Yes, thank you.
Sounds very exciting. Thank you, Michael, Laura. I can see everybody's itching to get their hands on your resources. So thank you very much. As Mick remind you about the TAPS, your accreditation, it will be out. If there's anything we can do to help others with accreditation in their diocese, please be in touch. Our next professional learning session is on 10th of September, and it will be our Catholic Music Festival. So tips on how to choose and use film in the RE classroom. We have a couple of reviewers. I presume you all know that Australian Catholics runs reviews of just about every movie. One of the reviewers, Peter Malone, is prolific, to say the least. And Michael and Laura have got some great ideas on how to use film and to do activities with film in the class. And then the one after that, our professional learning will be on 22nd of October, and it's our Great Teaching Ideas Swap Meet.